Helen, where is David? Why has he not come?
Rebecca, there is something you need to hear.
Just say it. Just say it.
He told them you were just the house help that raised him.
The pain started in Rebecca's stomach on a Tuesday morning in Enugu, sharp and sudden, folding her over the kitchen sink until the plate in her hand shattered on the tiles. By evening, she was on a hospital bed at Park Lane, an IV taped to the back of her hand, a doctor speaking in a low voice about a tumor that had been growing quietly for months. Rebecca did not cry. She had cried enough in her life. She simply asked the nurse for her phone and dialed the one number she trusted more than her own heartbeat, David's. It rang twice before going to voicemail. She told herself he was in court. David was a rising lawyer in Lagos now, a man with a name people repeated with respect at Maitama dinner parties and Lekki business breakfasts, a man Rebecca had built with her bare hands from the day her sister Ngozi died bringing him into the world. Rebecca was 23 then, unmarried, with her whole life still folded ahead of her like an unopened cloth. She closed that cloth herself, packed away every suitor who came asking, and raised her sister's son as though her own body had carried him. She sold her wrapper business little by little to pay his school fees at Federal Government College. She trekked from Ogui to Achara layout under the sun, selling akara so David could have a JAMB form. When he got into university to study law, Rebecca sewed late into the night, her fingers stiff with arthritis before she turned 40, because David's hostel fees would not pay themselves. 15 years she gave him, 15 years of her own womanhood, spent so that a boy who was not biologically hers would never feel the absence of a mother. Now she lay in a hospital bed, needing 800,000 naira for a surgery that could not wait, and David's phone rang and rang into silence. She called again the next morning, and the next. By the fourth day, the call stopped going through at all. The number had been changed. Rebecca's hands shook as she dialed his law firm in Victoria Island instead, her voice small and apologetic, the way poor relatives learn to sound when speaking to important offices. "Good morning. Please, I am looking for Barrister David Eze. I am his auntie." "He is in a meeting," the secretary said. The same line every single day for 3 weeks, until Rebecca stopped believing meetings could last that long and started believing something else entirely, something she did not yet have words for. By the second week, Rebecca had stopped asking the nurses to dial the number for her. She lay watching the ceiling fan turn, replaying every memory she had of David as a boy. The way he used to run to meet her at the junction when she returned from the market. The way he cried at 14 when she could not afford new shoes for his inter-house sports, and she had to sew the old ones back together by hand. She told herself there had to be an explanation. Men got busy. Lawyers had trials that swallowed weeks. She built excuses for him the way she had built everything else in his life, with patience, with love, with the quiet stubbornness of a woman unwilling to believe the worst about someone she had given everything to. It was Helen, Rebecca's cousin and oldest church friend, who came to the hospital with the words Rebecca had been refusing to imagine. Helen sat by the bed in her Ankara wrapper, eyes red before she even opened her mouth, and told Rebecca what her younger sister had heard at a bridal shower in Abuja. David was getting married to Angela, the only daughter of a wealthy Maitama family. And at the engagement dinner, when Angela's father had asked about David's people, David had smiled and said his mother died at birth, his father soon after, and that he was raised by house help who did her best. house help. Rebecca did not scream. She did not throw anything. She simply turned her face to the hospital wall and let 15 years pour silently out of her eyes. Because grief that deep does not make noise, it only makes weight. The surgery almost did not happen. Rebecca had no 800,000 naira and no nephew to call. But word travels fast in a church that has watched a woman raise another woman's child alone. And within a week, the congregation at St. Peter's Enugu had raised 600,000 naira, with Helen quietly covering the rest from her own savings without telling Rebecca how much it cost her. Rebecca went into surgery not knowing if she would survive it, and woke up 3 days later to Helen's face and a room full of flowers from women who owed her nothing but had given her everything. She recovered slowly, the wound in her body healing faster than the one in her chest. She did not call David again. She did not need to hear his voice to know what silence had already told her. But Lagos has a way of bringing people back together even when they are trying to stay apart. And 3 months later, an invitation arrived at Rebecca's gate in Enugu. Cream-colored card, gold lettering, the wedding of Barrister David Eze and Miss Angela Okokwo, holding at a hotel in Maitama, Abuja. Rebecca almost threw it away. But Helen, watching her hold the card with trembling fingers, said something that changed everything. "Rebecca, Pastor Emmanuel is officiating that wedding. He used to fellowship with us in Enugu before he relocated to Abuja. He does not know what David did to you. Nobody in that hall will know unless somebody tells them." Rebecca thought about it for 3 days. She did not want revenge. She had buried too much of her life giving rather than taking. But somewhere underneath the grief was something that deserved to be said out loud, not for David's shame, but for her own dignity. 15 years of it finally spoken into a room instead of swallowed in silence. She wrote Pastor Emmanuel a letter, not angry, not bitter, just true. She told him who raised David and what David had called her in front of his new family. The wedding hall in Maitama glittered with white orchids and gold chairs. 300 guests in asoebi the color of sunrise. Angela radiant in white lace. David sharp in a navy suit, smiling the smile of a man who believed his past had stayed exactly where he left it. Photographers moved quietly along the aisles, capturing the kind of wedding that would later fill newspaper society pages. The rising lawyer and the Maitama heiress, a love story Lagos had already begun to celebrate before it even reached its altar. Rebecca sat at the very back in her simple blue dress, unnoticed among the grandeur, her heart pounding louder than the choir's opening hymn, wondering until the last second whether she had made the right decision in coming at all. Pastor Emmanuel stood at the altar, Bible open, and began the ceremony as he had begun hundreds before it, until he reached the part where he always paused to speak about family, about the people who shape a man before God ever does. "David," he said, his voice carrying across the silent hall, "before we continue, I would like the woman who raised this man to stand." A murmur. David's smile faltered. Angela turned to him, confused, and from the back of the hall, in a simple blue dress, no gele, no jewelry, stood Rebecca. Quiet, dignified, her hands folded the way they had been folded over a sewing machine for 15 years. "This is Rebecca," Pastor Emmanuel said gently. "She sold her own mother's land and her own youth to raise David after his mother, her sister, died bringing him into this world. I officiated her sister's burial myself. I watched this woman trek miles selling akara so this boy could go to school. And 3 months ago, While she lay in a hospital bed needing surgery to save her life, I am told she was introduced to this family as house help. 300 guests turned to look at David. Angela's father's face changed from confusion to something colder. Angela herself stepped back from David's side, her bouquet trembling in her hands, staring at the man she thought she knew. David did not speak. He could not. Every word he might have used to explain himself had already been spent the day he chose a changed phone number over a dying woman's calls. The wedding did not collapse that day. Angela's family, humiliated but composed, allowed the ceremony to limp forward for the sake of appearances, though the warmth had drained from every corner of that glittering hall. But something else broke permanently, and everyone in my Tama society would whisper about it for months. The lawyer who erased the woman who built him. It was 6 months later that David came to Enugu, unannounced, standing outside Rebecca's gate the way a stranger stands when he no longer has the right to knock with familiarity. Angela had left him quietly 2 months after the wedding. His name now spoken in Lagos legal circles with a smirk instead of respect, his practice losing the soft polish that connections once gave it. Rebecca opened the gate herself. She did not slam it, she did not curse him, she simply looked at the man whose first cry she had heard in a delivery room 18 years ago, and let him stand there in the weight of his own silence. "Auntie," he finally said, his voice breaking like a boy's, "I am sorry. I don't know what came over me. I was ashamed of where I came from, and I let that shame make me throw away the only person who never once gave up on me." Rebecca studied him for a long moment, not coldly, not with the fire of old anger, but with the quiet clarity of a woman who had already grieved this loss once and rebuilt herself without him. "David," she said softly, "I did not raise you so that you would owe me anything. I raised you because I loved you. But love that is ashamed of itself is not love, it is performance. You can come in. I will not turn you away, because that is not who I am. But know this, the woman who used to wait by the phone for your call, hoping you remembered her, she is gone. What is left is a woman who survived without you, and you will have to earn your way back into a life you almost let die." She stepped aside and let him in, not because she had forgotten, but because dignity, she had learned, was never about punishing the guilty. It was about refusing to let their failure define the rest of her story. David sat in her small parlor that evening, surrounded by the same worn furniture his school fees had once been more important than, and felt, for the first time in his successful life, the true and unbearable weight of everything he had almost lost.